So the first one I'm going to talk about is Origeron glaucus, which is this one here. This is found in coastal bluffs, coastal scrub areas along California's coast. It does really well in kind of meadow grassland habitats in full sun. Um, Bees love it. It'll attract bumblebees and native bees to your garden. And it tolerates a wide variety of different soil types. And you can see this one still in flower there. Flowers spring through summer. The flowers can vary in color. They range from pinks to like light blues and things like that. To keep them fresh, you can just prune off the old flowers, deadhead them and stuff, and they do go a little dry in the summertime, but they rebound once the winter and spring rains come along too. So it's a really wonderful one for the Central Coast here. It does well on like a perennial border along paths. You don't want to kind of hide it in the backdrop of your garden. You're not going to see it because it's a low-growing plant. The other native plant I have here is Iris de Glaciana. This is a cultivar called Santa Lucia, which is from the Santa Lucia mountain range. Iris de Glaciana grows from the coast to up about 3,000 feet. So you can grow it in a lot of different places here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It has bluish flowers. Bumblebees love it. It will spread through your garden if you feel like it's getting too overgrown. The best time to transplant it or divide it is after the first rains. You'll see these little white roots starting to form on the plant. And when you see those little white roots starting to form, that is the best time to kind of divide it and move it around in your garden. It also does really well in kind of a perennial meadow grassland garden along a path or something like that. So another really wonderful plant. There's a lot of different irises in the trade. You'll see like an Amanata. There's ones called PCH, which stands for Pacific Coast Hybrids, and those are also very pretty. A lot of different flower colors with those. But I would say, in my opinion, others might disagree with me, but by far, Iris de Glaciana is one of the most sturdy irises that you can plant in your garden. Moving on to Australia, I have this one here. This is a Grevillea. It's called Perindo Royal Mantle. It's a cultivar. It is a wonderful ground cover. It does really well on embankments. It forms this really thick mat. One thing that I often look for in ground covers, because we do a lot of hand weeding here at the Arboretum, I look for ground covers that will actually crowd out weeds to reduce that amount of weeding that we do. And this one does a really good job of that. Hummingbirds and bees love the flowers. This one still, even in the summertime, the main bloom time is late winter, early spring, but even in the summertime without any irrigation, it's still flowering here in a garden. And then the final one I have for you is one from South Africa. This is a leucadendron, Safari Sunset. It grows about 8 to 10 feet, about 6 feet wide, but you can actually prune it to shape it. It does really well as a specimen plant in your garden. It can also grow as a windscreen or a hedge, also in your garden too. There's a lot of leucadendrons in the trade. What's really pretty in my mind about them all is that it's not necessarily the flowers that are the showy parts of the plant. It's the leaf or the foliage color, and they change color year round. Springtime, it's a different shade of red than in the fall and things like that. For most of these plants, generally speaking, you want well-draining soil, although some will do better and heavier soils as well. But well-draining. One thing to note, with anything from the Proteaceae family, which are like leucadendrons and grevilleas, if you do use fertilizer, you do not want to use phosphorus in your fertilizer. So that middle number, whenever you see fertilizers, they have 3 numbers. That middle number is phosphorus, and you want that number to be 0 if you're fertilizing any of your Proteaceae family plants.
This is from Argentina. This is a Pennisetum that is, there's no other grass like it. Pennisetum frutescens, naked fountain grass. So it gets 4 to 5 feet tall. And what's interesting is the leaves come off of evergreen glossy blue stems. And so when winter comes, it turns yellow, the leaves drop, but it leaves the stem up, and it sort of looks like a chondropetalum then for like the rest of the season. And the new leaves come off at these jointed stems. So when I planted this in Florida at Disney's Animal Kingdom, this was one of the only grasses that worked in the elephant containment, because the elephants would come and they'd take their trunks and they just pull something out of the ground and then scratch their back with it or something like that. But on this one, they'd go to grab it and it would snap off. So there you have it, Pennisetum frutescens. And I will just remind people that it does take water even to get drought-tolerant grasses established. So establishment is the key. This is a new Bouteloua from Texas, Bouteloua repens, with probably the greenest Bouteloua foliage I've ever encountered. Most Boutelouas are sort of gray-green, but it has these glorious little florets that come out pinky red and then they dry to a tan. And then this is our new, this is, to my knowledge, this is really the only Bouteloua gracilis in the California nursery trade that's actually native to California. I collected this on the edge of the Mojave Desert at about 8,500 feet elevation, right near Big Bear Lake. So maybe 50 miles as the crow flies from downtown LA. Anyway, it's a gorgeous little thing, foliage to 3 to 4 inches, and then that's to the top of the flower. I think this is a wonderful component to go in a succulent garden. This is a Mullenbergia asperifolia. It's a creeping, vining Mullenbergia that actually Randy Baldwin and I collected near Death Valley. Anyway, what's amazing about it is, and I'm so upset with myself, I actually dug a plant out of the ground today in Brisbane, but I left it, I forgot it, but it was this plant in flower. And it is just this gorgeous, silky thing. And I'm thinking you could make a lawn out of it, but it's a little stiff, but an amazing filler. Bouteloua gracilis, angel eyelash, I forgot to say the name. But I want you to also come up and take a look at what I think will be the future of turf grass in California, because we do need mowable turf. People do have children, there are sports, there are reasons to have turf, but this chunk of zoysia, this is called stadium, this went in this pot 3 months ago, and it has not been mowed. So it's essentially a dwarf lawn. So less mowing means you can plant bulbs and flowers in the lawn. So I'm also using it to make pathways through taller meadow grasses. Zoysia stadium. So Sizeleria, everybody knows the Sizelerias have really, those of you that understand the value of these, no finer ground cover grass, that is naturalistic but tidy. And you all know Greenlee hybrid and you know autumnalis, but you need to know these. This, of course, is Dave Frost's, his blue Sizeleria, his new Campo Azul dynamite, a little taller than autumnalis and Greenlee hybrid. And then this one is new from Europe. It's sort of like autumnalis on steroids, so it's just autumnalis instead of 12 or 14 inches. This is more like 16 inches. And with a showier flower, but it has that sort of chartreusey yellow-green. And then this one, I don't know, this was always my personal favorite, of course, before Greenlee hybrid, but this is, and maybe this is one of Greenlee hybrid's parents, this is Sizeleria hoifloriana, and it's just a gorgeous blue-green. You'll have to come up and feel it. And then our final one here is brush strokes. So this is another one of our new Sizelerias. This one probably will be protected. So the foliage to 6 inches, the flowers to 24 inches. So like a little paintbrush going straight up. And yeah, here's all these new native California grasses. You got to see this one. I'd seen it in literature, but I'd never seen it and had the ability to use it in the garden. This is Arizona cottontop, Digitaria californica, with these gorgeous little silky flowers. You can see why it's called cotton top. Here's two grasses from New Zealand and Australia. This is Poaceta. It's a clumping bluegrass from New Zealand, and this is my substitute for Mexican feathergrass. It has that same texture, the same color. It doesn't have, the showiest of blonde, but it also doesn't turn into a bad hair day the way Mexican feathergrass does. So Poaceta, which is a fun thing to say because it sounds like you're speaking Spanish, and you're not. But and then this, and so here's another bluegrass from New Zealand. So Poaceta is maybe 3 by 3, but this is Poa colonsoi, and essentially it's a blue form of Poaceta, taller, more robust. And the Poa flower, the Poaceae flower, is a silky. It's actually a really beautiful but generally sort of subtle flower. This one actually has a really showy flower. Mature clumps with all the water they could want would be 4 by 4 or 3 by 4, something like that. But almost all of these things, you can limit their growth by lavishing or withholding moisture.
One of them Rick already spoke about, and that was Grevillea Ornamental, which is this plant right here. This actually is inspired by a native variety, which is a natural hybrid that grows in the Blue Mountains. And I saw this in the wild when we went there with Roger Elliott, Arboretum tour in 1989. That's Grevillea gatashautii. It's a hybrid of a Grevillea called laurifolia that looks very much like this, with kind of a prickly variety called acanthofolia. It's inspired a recross, which on the right is Grevillea ostriflora fanfare. And what's good about these plants is they're extremely low. You can put them on very wide centers, so you only have to put discrete drip watering every 10 or 15 feet, so you don't have to broadcast water and grow weeds. And they develop very little litter or burnable mass, so since they stay so low, you don't have to worry about, as I did at my house, pity the poor wretch that has to go on the slope below the living room windows and claw all the dead landscape ground covers out, like caramel creepers, which have now got trunks the size of my thighs, which are dead. So yeah, they're watering them, yeah, they're green, but 90% of it's dead material underneath. It's still going to burn. So these have very low litter. They're completely weed smothering because they're just too tight, and you put very little water on them, and they attract hummingbirds. So at one point, the most popular plant in Australia was Grevillea Ornamental. So I'm actually speaking about another one of the most popular plants in just a minute. But this trio you consider it as a group. The gatashautii is the hardiest for frost. The ostriflora fanfare is the toughest for resisting, say, long extended winter rains and frost of next hardy and frost. And perennial ornamental is the densest and the fastest and probably the showiest, but it's also the most prone to frost damage and also gummosis or defoliation under very warm, wet, extensive rains. It usually comes right back into foliage, but it's a little better for Southern California just because in a really cold year, it's going to freeze back to the ground. Ostriflora fanfare is probably good down to 20, and gatashautii, I know is grown in Oregon, and they rate it as hardy below 15 degrees, maybe down to 10. So that's kind of how you sort these in the landscape. Another ground cover that's similar, this is Grevillea juniperina. The first one in the trade was brought in by Saratoga Hort and also the Western Hills Rare Plant Nursery. They called it Grevillea sulfurea, which is a yellow form of Grevillea juniperina. The landscape form, the original one, is this white stem thing in the front, which you almost can't touch. I had to pull the cans from the side. The original form, it's open and kind of ratty. There's a seedling of it, which is more improved, which is these darker green versions here in back, which are denser. And there's an experimental form, which is extremely tight dome over here. And those are the intermediate form is currently available as a ground cover, 20 feet, maybe by knee high, red flowers, attract hummingbirds, extremely drought tolerant. They can take winter inundation. Like a lot of these Australian, South African plants, they can actually grow underwater in the wintertime as long as they dry down in summer. It's very important. And the yellow version of it is this one here, Grevillea juniperina melonglo. It can bloom anytime it gets chill. Here's the flowers on it. And it's even lower. It's usually under shin high, and also can get about 20 feet across, and it will smother weeds. So, and this is also hardy, probably below 10 degrees, maybe down to 0. So some of these juniperinas come from very high elevations and far more drought tolerant than people expect. This is Grevillea superb. This was about 20 years ago the most popular plant in Australia. So it went from superb to Royal Mantle, and if you want to know what the current one is, or at least about 5 years ago, it's Lomandra Breeze. I had several commercial growers say that's the most popular plant in Australia. So moving from number one, the second, and then the third one is close to this Platinum Beauty here. But there's two analogs of this. The first is Robin Gordon, which is the darker pink flower. You can actually just bring the gallon can there, Melinda. That's good. This is Robin Gordon. This is the first version. The first cross, Grevillea banksii with Grevillea bipinnatifida. They recrossed it with the white form of banksii to get Superb, and then they did it again, and they got the one in back, which is Mason's hybrid, but everyone calls it Ned Kelly because it's a better name. He was the guy that dressed up in iron armor to fight the cops, and then they finally got smart and shot him in the leg, and he went down because he didn't have armor on his leg. There's all kinds of beers and bars named after Ned Kelly. Superb's the best of the lot. This should be in every landscape you do. It draws hummingbirds like no other plant in the world, period. Grevillea Moonlight, which is this white flowered form here that's tall, has about 3 times the nectar, but the hummingbirds don't see it and they won't go to it. But this has so much nectar you can slap it into your hand and just drink it. It's extremely heavy production, and you always see hummingbirds on this plant, and it flowers anytime it's got mature growth and gets a chill, which here is all year. So it can be in bloom 12 months of the year easily. So
second part of the name, Grevillea what?
it's Grevillea Superb. Superb, Robin Gordon, Ned Kelly. This is a little hardier by 2 or 3 degrees. So this one's got 2 or 3 degrees hardiness over these other two varieties. It's not as showy. It's hard to see here. The spike's a little more open, and the flowers tend to stand vertical to the cluster, so you see through it more. Whereas the Robin Gordon, they're denser, and they tend to lay like this along the stalk. You can see, so it's more opaque, and this color is much easier to use. This is the first form. Came in as Adenanthus Drummondii. They corrected the name or decided it's not Drummondii. It's actually Cunninghamii, and it might be a hybrid. It's actually in bloom. The little red flowers are all you get, but they're showy, and it's often got kind of pinkish new growth. There's a form called Silver Haze that may or may not be identical. We're not sure yet. It might have been a renaming of this, or it could be a separate form with a little bit pinker tips. It's very hard to separate. This is Adenanthus Sericeus, subspecies Sericeus. It's also in bloom. It's got little orange flowers. If you come up close, you can see it. It's the softest and ferniest and the nicest of them. It's the most frost tender, but it makes just a beautiful, tall, silver, soft, moving thing. People just like to touch it. And the last of these is called Adenanthus cuneatus coral drift. This is a production plant. It's got a little bit of pink on the tips. It's actually blooming, but you don't see it. This is an older plant, and it tends to look more like this in the ground when it dries down a bit. It's also in bloom. The flowers are pink, and again, not growing for flower, but this is recently becoming very popular.